This is a video about sobriety checkpoints. This is a procedure which allows officers to restrict the flow of traffic and to observe motorists for visual cues of impairment and to detect an odor of an alcoholic beverage upon their breath. Sobriety checkpoints typically involve brief and courteous exchanges between officers and drivers with only momentary delays in traffic. The purpose of this training video is to show you how to safely and legally conduct a sobriety checkpoint. Let me tell you why we conduct sobriety checkpoints. More than 700,000 people have died in alcohol-involved crashes in the United States since 1966. The rate has declined in recent years in part because of law enforcement efforts. Despite the improvements, about 17,000 people still lose their lives each year in alcohol-involved crashes. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, has contributed to the improved conditions by providing law enforcement officers with tools and training such as scientifically valid driving cues for detecting suspected impaired drivers while a vehicle is in motion, the standardized field sobriety test battery, and other programs and enforcement techniques aimed at deterring impaired driving. NHTSA has determined that sobriety checkpoints are an effective enforcement technique that deters motorists from driving while impaired. The guidelines summarized in this video are designed to provide law enforcement agencies with a uniform, proven method of planning, operating, and evaluating sobriety checkpoints. Agencies that have followed these guidelines have significantly reduced alcohol-related crashes in their jurisdictions. Operational experience is found, and court decisions have anticipated that effective sobriety checkpoint programs must consist of specific components. Now it's time to begin the briefing. We will discuss the components of successful checkpoints later. Good, you guys are right on time. The success of sobriety checkpoints depends upon smooth and efficient operations. The person selected as a supervisor of the checkpoint should be thoroughly familiar with all procedures and objectives. These include minimizing delay to the motoring public and keeping records, such as vehicle counts and any deviations from the original operational plan.
No sweat, I'll take care of it.
Officers selected to staff the checkpoint also should understand the procedures and objectives. Always begin each sobriety checkpoint operation with a briefing to ensure that all participants know what they are supposed to do and why. To be effective, sobriety checkpoints should be part of a continuing impaired driving program that includes vigorous enforcement and public information and education. The purpose of linking checkpoints to an ongoing public information program is to maximize the deterrent effect and increase the perception among motorists that they will be stopped if they operate a motor vehicle while impaired by alcohol or other drugs. I see the announcements have been broadcast and printed in the local newspapers. Research for NHTSA has found that checkpoints alone will not increase the perception of enforcement that is essential to an effective deterrence program. We must publicize the checkpoints. Although it might seem counterproductive to announce the law enforcement agency will be conducting a checkpoint, it is only widespread public awareness of a checkpoint program that deters motorists from driving while impaired. The driving public needs to know that you are enforcing impaired driving laws and that they will be caught if they drive impaired. What's next on the agenda, Jay?
Following the NHTSA guidelines, we talked with our prosecutors and judges when planning our sobriety checkpoint program. We wanted to advise them of our plans and ensure that legally acceptable procedures would be followed. Many jurisdictions no longer require that an agency announce the exact dates and locations of checkpoints. If specific date and time announcements are not made, general announcements that checkpoints will be conducted periodically throughout the year will contribute to the deterrent effect of the program. Further, we thought it wise to invite our judges, prosecutors, and community leaders to observe our checkpoints in person. We want to make them feel a partner in our community's impaired driving enforcement program. The courts have been very clear in the need for advanced planning when conducting sobriety checkpoints. Advanced planning includes written procedures on how the checkpoints will be operated. Established policy and procedures ensure that checkpoints are conducted systematically and with minimal intrusion and inconvenience to the public. We followed NHTSA's model, policy, and guidelines, which easily can be adapted to any agency's specific requirements. We downloaded the guidelines from the NHTSA website. Development of contingency procedures is an important part of advanced planning. Any deviation from the predetermined plan for stopping vehicles should be documented and the reason for the deviation recorded. For example, the traffic was backing up or rain was reducing visibility. Courts have allowed deviations from the established procedures as long as the contingency plans have been developed in advance and the reasons for switching to a contingency plan are documented. The safety of the public and the participating officers is our first concern when selecting the location for a sobriety checkpoint. Tonight, we've selected a location which allows officers to direct vehicles out of the stream of traffic without startling the drivers or causing a safety hazard. We also have ensured that we do not create a traffic backup. I'll tell you more about the plan once we get out to the site. Do you have any questions? You each have a copy of the plan in front of you. Make sure you guys sign the cover sheet verifying that you understand the plan.
There should be sufficient space to pull vehicles off the travel portion of the roadway so field sobriety tests can be conducted. The area should be well illuminated. There was no permanent lighting, so we brought in portable lights. The posted speed limit must be considered. We selected a site that would provide officers with good visibility of approaching traffic. Visibility is needed to monitor the traffic flow and to see any unusual driving behaviors when vehicles approach the checkpoint lane. We also looked for a site that is objectively related to impaired driving. For example, we looked at sites with high incidence of alcohol-involved crashes and driving violations, and sites with unusual number of nighttime single vehicle crashes. Conducting a checkpoint near the site of a recent alcohol-involved crash can be particularly effective in creating public awareness and support for a program. Having a handout to tell drivers why the site was selected is a good way to get the message out. You also should consider the expected traffic volume. A high volume location might require you to sample the vehicles or occasionally close the checkpoint to avoid traffic backups and long delays. You should implement a sampling plan if the traffic volume prevents you from stopping every vehicle without causing a hazard or significant inconvenience. The sampling plan must be non-discretionary, developed in advance of the checkpoint, and be part of your established policy. The plan must be systematic, such as contacting every 3rd, 5th, or 10th vehicle, depending on the traffic volume and delays. When conditions require that you switch to a sampling plan, all contacts must be made according to that plan. In other words, an officer cannot choose which vehicles to contact and which to allow to pass once the sampling plan has been implemented. The officer in charge must direct all contact sampling decisions, depending on the traffic volume and staffing level. Some impaired drivers might pass through the checkpoint without contact during these conditions, but they and other drivers who pass will see the checkpoint and become aware of the special enforcement effort.
Would you tell this group about warning devices and signs?
Sure. Approaching motorists must be warned about the sobriety checkpoint. This can be accomplished by signs showing that there is a checkpoint ahead. Safety cones or similar devices can be used for marking and closing lanes on the roadway. Permanent or portable lighting should be used to illuminate the checkpoint area. The placement and types of traffic control devices you use should comply with federal, state, or local transportation codes. Checkpoint planners should check with their local agencies responsible for administrating the location and placement of devices as part of the planning. The U.S. Supreme Court requires that checkpoints display the visible signs of legitimate authority so motorists are assured that they are being stopped for lawful purposes. The presence of uniformed officers and their marked vehicles reassures motorists of the legitimate nature of the activity. This is an important aspect of the sobriety checkpoint and part of the effort to minimize the perceived intrusion to law-abiding motorists who are affected by the checkpoint. A sworn uniformed officer should be assigned to provide on-site supervision of the checkpoint. This officer in charge should be responsible for the overall operation and should be thoroughly familiar with all procedures, including contingency plans. The checkpoint should be staffed by a sufficient number of uniformed personnel to ensure a safe, efficient operation based on traffic volume, roadway size, and location. Staffing level is an important consideration. Some agencies have developed techniques for running checkpoints with as few as 3 to 5 officers, with some support tasks done by civilian volunteers. In contrast, combining the resources of more than one agency can demonstrate a strong local commitment to DWI enforcement. There are trade-offs when making decisions about staffing level. For example, at a low staffing level checkpoint, it may become necessary to close the contact lane when all officers are engaged in administering field sobriety tests or transporting suspects. However, fewer personnel means lower costs. An agency might find it possible to conduct a program of frequent low staffing level checkpoints rather than occasionally a high staff checkpoint. Research found checkpoints to have a greater deterrent effect when conducted frequently. No difference in deterrent effects were found between checkpoints conducted by 3 officers to 5 officers and checkpoints conducted by 12 to 15 officers. Again, officer safety should be your primary concern. Sergeant, I need to help with the cones. Could you explain testing and logistics to our visitors?
Yes, I will. The logistics of chemical testing must be included in your plan. A mobile breath testing unit with a qualified operator can be physically located at the checkpoint. This is particularly helpful when you expect large numbers of DWI arrests. As an alternative, you should develop a plan for transporting suspected violators to a location where chemical tests can be performed. The officers who participate in sobriety checkpoints should be trained in detecting impaired drivers. Sobriety checkpoints that routinely permit impaired drivers to pass through undetected will not achieve the desired deterrent effect. Officers should look for the indicators of impairment during the initial contact with the driver at a checkpoint. These cues include the odor of an alcoholic beverage, alcohol containers, or drug paraphernalia, fumbling with driver's license or registration, slurred speech, admission of drinking or drug use, or inconsistent or slow responses to questions. Some officers are particularly skillful at creating divided attention tests during these brief encounters, such as asking 2 separate questions. Impaired drivers often answer the second question and forget the first one. Articulable suspicion is required to further detain a motorist. Articulable suspicion means an officer can describe what it is about the motorist that indicates impairment. When the contact officer's suspicions are raised, further investigation can take place out of the contact lane to avoid impeding the flow of traffic. Another officer might replace the contact officer so he or she can continue the investigation, but it usually is more effective to direct the motorist to another officer while the contact officer remains at the contact point. The next step usually is administration of the standard field sobriety test battery, which includes the walk and turn, 1-leg stand, and horizontal gaze nystagmus tests. These tests were developed by NHTSA with the assistance of hundreds of law enforcement officers. They are a highly accurate and scientifically valid tool for helping police officers make arrest decisions. After conducting the SFSTs, the officer may use a portable breath device. An arrest should be made if the motorist's behavior or the SFST result indicate it. Asking to see a motorist driver's license at the contact point of a checkpoint creates an opportunity to observe the driver's behavior looking for signs of impairment. Also, in some jurisdictions, the law requires officers to impound the vehicles of motorists who are found to be operating without a valid license. It is not unusual for large numbers of arrests to be made and many vehicles to be impounded during combined DWI driver's license checkpoints. Sobriety checkpoints should be publicized to obtain the maximum effect on the driving public. Only a few drivers in your area will experience your sobriety checkpoints personally, but many more will learn about the checkpoints through media reports or word of mouth. Publicity and open discussion are necessary to increase the deterrent effect of your checkpoints. Some law enforcement agencies have formed committees of concerned citizens to organize press conferences, generate free publicity, and assist at the checkpoints. Also, checkpoints provide good opportunities to distribute educational materials regarding other traffic safety issues.
Do you have any questions, sir? How's it going?
We're underway now, but I haven't spoken about the evaluation process. Would you handle that for me, Lieutenant?
Be glad to.
Thank you.
The evaluation is a final component of a successful sobriety checkpoint program. The 2 main categories for evaluating checkpoints are public reaction and objective measures of checkpoint effects. Public reaction can be measured by the responses to questions asked by contact officers at the checkpoint. or the responses on a short questionnaire distributed at the checkpoint to be completed later and mailed back to the agency. Questions that might be asked include, have you ever experienced a checkpoint before? Did you know a checkpoint was planned for this evening? If yes, where did you learn of it? Do you believe checkpoints help deter impaired driving? Do you support this agency's efforts to counter impaired driving? Many officers are surprised by the kind and supportive comments that they hear from drivers at sobriety checkpoints. Studies have found a lot of public support for efforts to counter impaired driving, and the support for checkpoints tend to increase as more people learn about checkpoint programs. Some of the more objective, direct measures that you can include in your evaluation are number of vehicles passing through the checkpoint, average time delay to motorists, number of motorists detained for field sobriety testing, number and types of arrests, changes in the number of impaired driving arrests over time, change in the number of alcohol crashes over time. A decline in the number of alcohol-involved crashes is the best indicator of the deterrent effect of a checkpoint program. Because of the enormous cost to society that result from crashes, it doesn't take many prevented crashes to offset the cost of special enforcement efforts. For example, one study found that the checkpoint programs of 4 mid-sized communities resulted in savings to society of nearly $3.5 million during a 9-month period. Sometimes it is difficult for law enforcement officers to accept a declining arrest rate as a measure of success. However, making fewer and fewer arrests during the course of a checkpoint program and encountering more designated drivers may both be objective indicators of a program's deterrent effects. Thanks for coming along with us tonight, and good luck with your sobriety checkpoint program.
The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration encourages law enforcement agencies to conduct sobriety checkpoints. The checkpoint should be part of an impaired driving program that includes vigorous enforcement, coupled with public information and education. When conducted correctly, sobriety checkpoints are one of the most effective methods for deterring impaired driving. Law enforcement experience, supported by court decisions, has shown that effective sobriety checkpoint programs consist of the 12 components described in this training video and listed here. Ongoing program to deter impaired driving, judicial support, existing departmental policy, site selection, special warning signs or devices, visible police authority, chemical testing logistics, contingency planning, detection and investigation techniques, operational briefings for participating officers, comprehensive public information and education programs, data collection and evaluation.